that claimed to have discovered 39 million masks for healthcare workers fighting coronavirus, was duped in an elaborate scheme uncovered by FBI investigators. U.S. Attorney Scott Brady of the Western District of Pennsylvania said FBI agents and prosecutors stumbled onto the arrangement while looking into whether they could intercept the masks for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for FEMA. Quote, the federal government has been quietly seizing supplies across the country, taking the orders placed by hospitals and clinics, and not publicly reporting where the products are being routed. But in this case, there was no warehouse and there were no masks to seize. So, hooray for there being a criminal probe against the scammers who were trying to sell these masks that didn't really exist to California health workers and hospitals, right? Hooray that that's now going to be a criminal probe. But the only reason the federal government found out about this scheme and found out the masks didn't exist is because when they thought the masks did exist, they were trying to steal them from California, because the federal government is still doing that even now. I mean, it's 3 months since the United States started fighting its own coronavirus outbreak, and ours is now by far the worst outbreak in the world. But this far into it, to the extent that we have a national response to this crisis, it's that the federal government is like reading the paper and watching news reports to find out if any states or cities or clinics or random union officials might have been able to find some gear somewhere. And then the federal government is coming in and stealing that gear before it can get to the healthcare workers it was otherwise going to go to. I mean, the federal government, you will recall, the president, you will recall, told the states it was up to them to figure out where they could try to get critical medical supplies. Hey, governors, go shopping. You guys figure it out. See what you can find. The federal government under President Trump ran down the national stockpile of critical supplies that they did have control of by randomly sending those supplies out, apparently according to who the president wanted to brag that he had sent stuff to the point where the national stockpile is now totally depleted. When the federal government did finally try to get some stuff themselves, the way they got their stuff was by bogarting stuff that the states had found and sourced for themselves. And that is still their MO. That is still going on, still today. That's what they're doing to the states. Here's the Washington Post, quote, some governors and lawmakers have watched in disbelief as they have sought to close deals on precious supplies, only to have the federal government swoop in to preempt the arrangements. Officials in one state are so worried about this possibility that they're considering dispatching police or even the National Guard to greet 2 chartered FedEx planes scheduled to arrive in the next week with millions of masks from China, according to people familiar with the planning. These people spoke on the condition of anonymity. They asked that their state not be identified to avoid flagging federal officials to their shipment, because they believe federal officials would steal it if they knew where it was coming. That's the status of our nation's response to the coronavirus epidemic right now. That's the leadership we've got from our government. With 579,000 confirmed coronavirus cases among Americans, with more than 23,000 Americans already dead. The federal government's big idea for supplying the nation's health workers and hospitals, for obtaining critical medical supplies, is still to find out when states are buying stuff and then go take it and not say where it's going. Good luck, America. I mean, when the president said, I'm behind you on this, governors, he meant like in the form of a stick up.
But you did forensics on, there was big news in March where a doctor who was the head of a medical group said that the government was now interfering in his purchase and acquisition. And he even said that the FBI arrived on the delivery of the goods and confiscated them. And he was not even inferring, he was kind of, it was a declamation that they were confiscating them for their own use because there was, a shortage. And then you posted a thread. I think I communicated with you right before, but then you posted a thread that did the forensics on that. And I didn't want to bring it up here in terms of all the tweets, because I could have actually done that. I have a lot of technology here, man. I'm powerful. But can you, if your memory, and I have a feeling it does, if your memory is good enough, can you kind of roll that back? Because it was around March, and it got a lot of attention as well, because you were the only person. Everybody in the world was on that doctor's side, and it was an anti-Trump type of thing. And most people, and certainly a lot of people here, aren't anti-Trump, pro-Trump, anti-Biden. I mean, people just really want to understand beyond kind of the nonsensical, partisan type of stuff. So the doctor made this claim, and then the resistance took that up as to create kind of a panic and then it was amplified on Twitter by inauthentic behavior, which then drove even more people to feel that it now had some authority because of all the volume that the tweets got. So can you do the forensics on that? Do you mind doing a post-mortem on what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's am I allowed to swear on this? Is this like an R-rated thing or what? Because the word that I
don't curse. Don't curse. It's a family thing, man.
Well, and it involves horse, and so it was really, to me, one of the most obvious and bald-face stories that during that time of people just flat making stuff up or over dramatizing it to such an extent.
Let's begin with what the story was, and then let's do a recap of your forensics on it.
Yeah. So the basic thrust of the story is that a small healthcare practice in like a hospital group in Massachusetts could not lay hands on any PPE through their normal suppliers, the Cardinals and Cardinal Health and McKesson's and those guys. And so they resorted to utilizing some brokers, and that became a huge ecosystem for a while, this broker economy. And they bought from these brokers, and they paid exorbitant sums of money up front to bring in, I believe it was masks was the claim on that, from overseas. And so the basic claim was that the stuff finally landed here, and then Department of Homeland Security got involved, and the FBI got involved, and they had to, land this land this plane of PPE at some airfield in the middle of nowhere, and then have it, securely, clandestinely trucked to some warehouse in Jersey. And then the FBI showed up to raid it. And then they had to call their congressman to get involved. And then the congressman apparently made some calls to Homeland Security and the FBI, and they released the shipment finally. And so it was this very dramatic, Jason Bourne type of narrative.
It was cinematic. And people at that time, it was cinematic, and people at that time actually called him heroic. They called it like Homeric, right? They called him kind of the Homeric beyond any type of reason.
Absolutely. There was
and then you did the forensics on that. So can you help me better understand everything that was misrepresented?
I don't want to be here all night, but so the main misrepresentations were several-fold. That they had done everything completely on the up and up, which they hadn't. B, that Homeland Security and FBI tracked these shipments down to take them, basically to repurpose them. And the claim was that the shipment was very nearly seized, except for the midnight intervention of their congressman, and that was also not true. The method by which they claimed to have transported into the United States and then through the United States also made no sense whatsoever. So these are things that when you're someone,
no sense, because you discussed how you have to prepay for like the bill of lading or whatever it is, that there's an actual process, that's a very rigid type of sequence that has to go through with. First, I have a good memory. First, they usually send you a sample of the product.
Correct.
For your review, and then you already have to pay for it, and the receipt is very significant. The receipt, whatever your language in this is, because you did like 6 tweets on it. The receipt is something that really is not just a demonstration of proof, but it has to do with the shipment of it, and there are some other logistical parts of it.
Yeah. So the claim that they couldn't prove title to the cargo, which means that they own it, they're responsible for it as the importer of record, was that, well, the broker was the one importing it and they were buying it here on the U.S. side. But what they were describing was an air freight transaction that is what we call DDP, delivered duty paid. So they show their involvement as it didn't jibe, right? So the claim that, well, we didn't ask for samples, we didn't know we were getting, it's totally sight unseen, we were just hoping we were getting the right product. Even at that, I was importing whole airplanes at that time of PPE, of things like gloves and masks. And even then, the factories were still FedExing or sending DHL or UPS samples to the US. Hey, this is the exact thing you're going to get. Allegedly, in a lot of cases, it wasn't, but that was the process. And then you stroked a purchase order to them. You paid them immediately. Most factories at that time were doing complete cash up front. So you had to take ownership of the cargo. So if you were doing that, if the broker was doing that on your behalf, you pay the broker pays them, the broker keeps their cut up front for themselves, and then has to also pay for the freight. At the time you pay for the freight, and already by then air freight had become prepaid as well, because everybody needed to get their freight out of China, right? So the airlines were saying, no, we're not offering credit, we're not offering payment on delivery, anything like that. We're telling you it's going to cost $2.5 million to charter the 747. You're going to put $2.5 million in our hands and we'll fly your stuff. And if you don't, somebody else will, and we'll fly their stuff. So that was the situation we found ourselves in. And when you do that, you have a great deal of control. If you're the importer, you have a great deal of control.
Okay. So the doctor got this stuff apparently, and then they claimed that the FBI kind of demanded it, took a claim on it.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was what I suspected at the time to be very true, because I'd already had one incident similar-ish to it on some gloves, was the brokers who were involved in that transaction did not have a history of importing medical product, let alone stuff that was claimed to be genuine article N95 masks, which are medical devices. So because they're used in surgical suites. So because of that, the FBI had an involvement in saying, we suspect that these guys have previously engaged in similar sorts of fraudulent or criminal behavior, and we're watching them. We're going to be involved in this from the backside. The claim that two agents just rolled up and threatened to take everything also doesn't make sense. If they were actually coming to raid the shipment, they would have rolled in with a much substantially larger presence of people to manage that if they feared that there was any sort of danger. Homeland Security's claimed involvement also was not in any way, did not jibe with anything I'd ever previously dealt with. The involvement of Homeland Security was simply that it could have been anything from these were extremely in-demand, high-value articles where Homeland Security, because they are the agency that controls Customs and Border Protection, also has an oversight role in managing these imports. They would have necessarily been involved. So what I figured out right away, and called a few people that I know in the agencies involved and said, is this probably what's happening here? And they said, yeah, that's absolutely what's happening. It's guaranteed suspicion of fraud on the part of the broker and the importer who is selling it to this hospital. Their involvement was in no way to come take it.
So now the easy story for the media was the doctor is a hero because they really want to celebrate, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But for the explanation that was required is complex. So it's easy for them to say he's a hero because that doesn't really require any interrogation for the most part. When you hear somebody's a hero, there's an assumption that there's a truthfulness to it, maybe an embellishment, but there's a truthfulness to it. But if I were to say he's not a hero, that then kind of demands interrogation, right? That demands kind of an interlocutory.